Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be going deep into the nature of reality itself.
Oh, wow.
We've got excerpts from Reality, a very short introduction by Jan Westerhoff.
It's a fascinating book.
It really is, and I think what's so cool about this is that it's not, just some abstract philosophical debate.
Right.
It's something that helps us understand how we think about pretty much everything.
Absolutely.
From like our daily lives to, craziest scientific discoveries.
Like, how do we determine what's real?
Yeah, exactly. And
What tools can we use to sort of critically analyze what we even mean by that?
that's what we're going to get into. So Westerhoff, he starts off by giving us like 5 different ways to define the word real.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a word we use all the time.
Right.
But when you really start to think about like what it means, things get
It gets complicated.
complicated really fast.
Yeah, he doesn't give them catchy names or anything in the book. But we've taken the liberty of giving each definition like a little label just to help us as we kind of navigate these ideas.
I love that. Okay, so first up we have what we're calling the matrix definition.
Okay.
This one's pretty straightforward. It's basically, if you can sense it, it's real.
Like if you can see it, touch it, taste it, hear it, smell it.
It's like what you see is what you get.
Yeah, pretty simple, right? But as we know, our senses can be tricked.
Oh, yeah.
Think about optical illusions or hallucinations.
Right.
Perceive them, but they might not actually be an accurate representation of like what's really out there.
So it's intuitive.
Yes.
But it's definitely not foolproof.
Exactly. Which brings us to the next one.
Okay.
We're calling this one the 1984 definition, named after George Orwell's dystopian novel, right?
Okay.
And the idea here is that if enough people agree on something, then it becomes real.
So this is getting into like the idea of like shared reality, right?
Yeah.
It's like if we all believe something, does that make it real just because we all believe it?
That's the question, right? And it's a really compelling idea, but it also has its own set of problems.
For sure.
Like, what about mass delusions? Or, when large groups of people are convinced of something that turns out to be completely false,
Yeah.
it really makes you question how...
How much our perception of reality is just based on what other people
Exactly.
tell us.
So popularity doesn't necessarily equal truth.
It is definitely not.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's our next definition?
Number 3, we're calling this Johnson's definition. And this one kind of relies on the idea that if you didn't make it up, it's real.
Okay, this one feels very grounded in
Yeah.
common sense. Like, I
Yeah.
didn't invent this table, so it must be real.
Right. But think about this. Something like the stock market. It exists because we all agree that it exists and we all participate in it. But if we all suddenly decided to stop trading, would it still be real?
That's a really good point.
It makes you realize how much of what we consider real is based on like these shared beliefs and these systems that we create. It's all about agreement.
Exactly. So then we come to our 4th definition, the apocalyptic definition. This one is kind of based on the idea that if something exists even without humans around,
Okay.
then it's truly real.
It's independent of us.
Yes, exactly. It strips away the human element.
Yeah.
So it's a very minimalist view, but a very powerful one, for sure.
It's very grounding.
Yes.
It's like, okay, I can get behind that. What's our last definition?
The 5th one is the turtle definition. And this one is like the ultimate search for the foundation of everything, right?
The bedrock of reality.
Yeah. What is that foundation?
Yeah.
And how do we know?
Right.
Westerhoff kind of points out that like figuring out what that foundation is a whole other problem.
It's a whole other deep dive, yeah.
Exactly. But what's important to remember here is that it's not necessarily about finding like the one right answer, like which one of these is the correct definition of reality.
So we're not trying to figure out which one is the best one,
Exactly. What's really fascinating is how they act as lenses.
through which we can examine our own assumptions about reality.
Okay, I like that. So these are just tools to help us understand
Yes.
how we think about the world.
Exactly. And once we understand that, then we can start to really sort of pick apart, what are the different ways that we can think about reality? And how does that shape our understanding of the world around us?
Right, because it might be a lot more fluid than we
Yes.
think it is.
Exactly. Now, having explored these definitions of real, let's actually dive into a specific aspect of reality that has really kind of puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries.
Okay.
And that is, what is matter? Like, what is the stuff of the world actually made of?
Let's get into it. Okay, so we've been talking about all these different ways to define real, but what about the stuff that the world is actually made of? Like, what is matter? at its most basic level.
Yeah, it's a question that people have been grappling with for, like, forever. I mean, for centuries. The debate was really centered around two main views, right? So is matter infinitely divisible, kind of like a smooth, continuous substance? Or is it made up of these tiny little indivisible particles?
So it's like, imagine you have a jar of jelly, and you keep cutting it in half.
Right.
And you could theoretically keep cutting it forever.
Yeah.
So that's the idea of infinitely divisible matter.
Exactly. But this jelly model, as intuitive as it might seem, it kind of runs into some problems. Like Westhoff uses this great example. If you have two oranges, right, and they're both made of this infinitely divisible jelly, how can one be bigger than the other?
It's true. If they both have like an infinite number of parts, how could one be larger?
Right. It challenges the very notion of like size and measurement.
Right.
So this is where the other view, the idea of matter as these tiny particles, starts to seem a bit more appealing.
So it's like a bucket of shot, and each tiny pellet is like a fundamental unit.
Yeah, and you can't break it down any further.
Okay, so that makes sense, right? But I'm guessing there are some issues with that theory as well.
Well, yeah, especially when we start to get into quantum physics.
Okay, so this is where things start to get really, really strange.
Yeah, it definitely challenges our kind of everyday intuitions about how things work.
Yeah, we know what they say about quantum physics. It's the realm where the universe stops making sense.
Haha, yeah, something like that. But you know, it also reveals this like beauty and strangeness that's really awe-inspiring when you think about it.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Give me an example.
Okay, so think about the double slit experiment.
Okay, remind me how that one goes.
Okay, so imagine you have a barrier with two tiny slits in it,
Okay,
and you fire a beam of electrons at this barrier.
okay.
What would you expect to see on a screen behind the barrier?
I guess I would expect to see like two bright spots where the electrons went through the two slits.
Right. Yeah, that's what you would think, based on like how we normally experience particles.
Great.
But that's not what happens. You actually get what's called an interference pattern.
So it's not just two bright spots.
No, it's like these series of bright and dark bands, as if the electrons were behaving like waves and kind of interfering with each other.
So the electrons are acting like waves instead of particles.
Yeah, so this is the really strange thing about quantum physics, right? Electrons and other particles exhibit what's called like wave-particle duality.
Oh, I've heard of that. So they can act like both.
Exactly, depending on how you observe them.
Okay, my mind is already starting to belt a little bit. It gets even weirder though, right?
It does. So the really crazy part is that you get this interference pattern even if you fire the electrons like one at a time.
So each electron is going through both slits at the same time.
It's like each electron is interfering with itself. And that's where the whole concept of wave functions comes in.
Okay, wave functions. That sounds complicated.
It's not as complicated as it might seem. So a wave function, it's not a wave of stuff like a water wave. It's more like a wave of probability.
A wave of probability.
Yeah, so imagine like a wave, but instead of water, it's made of pure possibility.
Okay.
And where the wave is high, that's where the electron is most likely to be found.
Okay.
But it's only when we observe it that the wave collapses and the electron becomes like a definite thing in a definite spot.
So it's like until you look at it, it exists in all these possible states.
Yeah.
And then when you observe it,
You force it to choose.
okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So it's like the act of observing is what makes it real.
That's one way to think about it. And it really raises some profound questions about the role of the observer in all of this.
Right, it brings us to the observer problem we were talking about before.
Exactly. So if even the camera, recording the electron is made up of particles that also have these wave functions.
But what's really doing the observing?
Yeah, that's the question, right? Like, where do we draw the line between observer and observed?
Some physicists have even proposed that consciousness itself might be the ultimate observer.
It's a very radical idea, but it does make you think.
It's like saying a rock isn't real until someone looks at it.
Yeah, it definitely challenges our intuitions about a world that exists independently of us.
This kind of throws a wrench in that apocalyptic definition we talked about. The one that says things are real even if there aren't humans around.
Exactly. So, are we saying that the mind is somehow woven into the fabric of reality?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
I mean, we're so used to thinking of the world as being solid, defined. But what if, at its most fundamental level, it's all just a dance of possibilities that only become real when we observe them?
It's a huge shift in perspective, and it has implications not just for how we understand matter, but for how we understand ourselves, our very sense of self.
So we've explored how matter gets pretty weird when we look at quantum physics. But what about ourselves? I mean, we think of ourselves as these solid beings, but Is that really true?
Well, our sense of self is something we tend to take for granted, but when you really start examining it, you realize it's way more complex than it seems at first glance.
Yeah, Westerhoff really challenges a lot of assumptions we have about the self.
He points out all these things that we think we know about ourselves and then kind of systematically dismantles them.
Like the idea that the self is just our physical body.
Right. We've already talked about how our bodies are constantly changing, with cells being replaced all the time.
And then there are things like phantom limbs, where someone can feel sensations in a limb that isn't even there anymore.
Exactly. If the self were just the body, how would you explain that?
So it seems like our sense of self is more than just physical. It's tied to our mental and emotional experiences as well.
Absolutely. So if it's not just our physical body, then where is the self located? Does it even have a location?
That's a good question.
This is where things get really interesting. The philosopher Daniel Dennett has a thought experiment that really challenges this idea of a localized self.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine your brain being surgically removed and kept alive in a vat, but still connected to your body.
Hold on, let me try to picture this. So my brain is in a jar, but I can still control my body out in the world.
Exactly. All your senses, your movements, everything feels just as it normally would. So the question is, where would you feel like you are?
That's a tough one. I think I would still feel like I was experiencing the world through my body. It's like that's where my consciousness would be.
Right. So even though your brain is physically located in a vat, your sense of self is still out there in the world.
It really makes you wonder where our sense of self comes from.
It highlights the idea that even our sense of location, of ourselves, is this mental construction, a way of organizing our experience.
So that's one assumption about the self shattered.
Yeah.
But it gets even more complicated, right? We tend to think of the self as this thing that stays the same over time. Like there's this core you that persists through all of life's changes.
It's a comforting thought, for sure. But the reality is that we change so much throughout our lives. Physically, mentally, emotionally. Our beliefs, our values, our memories are all constantly evolving.
So is there even a you that existed 10 years ago that's really the same as the you today?
It's a fundamental question of personal identity. What makes you you over time?
Yeah, it's a really deep question. And if the self is this fluid, always changing thing, what does that mean for our sense of free will? I mean, we like to think that we're in control, making our own decisions, but is that just an illusion?
Well, there's research that suggests our conscious experience of making a decision actually comes after our brains have already started to initiate the action.
Oh, wow. So our brains are calling the shots, and our conscious minds are just along for the ride.
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes you wonder what free will even means, if our actions are already set in motion before we're even aware of deciding to do them.
It's definitely a challenge to our understanding of free will. It suggests that our conscious experience might be more like a story we tell ourselves to make sense of our actions rather than the actual driving force behind them.
So maybe the self is more like a story we tell ourselves, this evolving narrative that brings together our memories, our experiences, and our beliefs.
There's a theory called memetics that explores this idea. It suggests that our minds are like ecosystems of memes, ideas, beliefs, behaviors that replicate and compete for our attention, much like genes compete for survival.
So instead of a solid, unchanging self, we're more like a collection of these memes that just happen to be really good at self-preservation.
It's a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating idea. Okay, so we've talked about matter and the mysteries of the self, and both have turned out to be much more complex than we initially thought. But there's one final piece of the puzzle we haven't really addressed. Time.
Time, it's probably the most enigmatic aspect of reality. We all experience it so intimately, but it's so hard to define or really grasp what it is.
It really is. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you grip, the faster it seems to slip away.
Exactly. Westerhoff talks about John McTaggart, a philosopher who proposed two ways of thinking about time.
Okay, tell me more.
There's the A series, where time flows, with moments going from future to present to past.
This is how we usually experience time. Like this constant flow, a moving presence.
Exactly. And then there's the B series, which views time as fixed.
So there's no flow, no sense of a moving present in the B series.
Right. It's just a series of events in a specific order.
Like beads on a string.
Yeah, that's a good way to picture it. But McTaggart argued that the B series is incomplete because time, by its nature, has to involve change.
Right, a static, unchanging time wouldn't really make sense. But then Einstein comes along and throws a whole other wrench into the works with his theory of relativity, right?
Absolutely. Einstein showed us that there's no single now that everyone agrees on.
So my now might not be the same as your now.
Exactly. Two events that seem simultaneous to one observer could happen in a different order for someone moving at a different speed.
So we have this idea of flowing time, but it's not a universal flow, it's relative. It really makes you question whose reality counts.
That's the thing about relativity. It challenges our common sense notions of a shared present, this one moment we all experience together.
Okay, so with all these different conceptions of time, is there any way to reconcile a solid concept of reality? Does time even exist in a meaningful way, or is it just an illusion?
Some physicists, like Julian Barber, propose that the universe is this giant, unchanging block with all moments existing all at once.
Whoa, so it's like all of history, past, present, and future is all happening simultaneously.
Yeah, it's a really radical idea.
Yeah.
What we perceive as this flow of time might just be an illusion.
I don't know about you, but my head is spinning. It's incredible how exploring these concepts can change the way you experience reality.
That's the power of philosophy. It pushes us to question our assumptions and examine the foundations of how we understand the world.
So what's the takeaway? Is there one right way to think about reality, time, the self?
I don't think so. The important thing is that we keep questioning that these different perspectives from philosophy to physics give us tools to navigate the complexity of existence.
Like the more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know.
Exactly. And to wrap things up, Westhoff mentions this experiment where our choices in the present might influence the past. If that's true, what does it even mean to have free will?
Wow, it's like every answer just leads to more questions.
That's the beauty of exploration.
I love that. Well, for anyone who wants to dive deeper into these mind-bending ideas, I highly recommend checking out Westhoff's book, Reality, a very short introduction. It's definitely a wild ride.
It's a must-read for anyone who wants to understand the nature of reality.
And on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought. What if reality is far more malleable, far more interconnected, far more mysterious than we ever imagined? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, reality might not be what it seems.